The observation deck of the research station hung silent, a transparent bubble suspended against the infinite darkness of space. Dr. Elena Rodriguez pressed her hand against the reinforced glass, her breath creating a momentary fog that quickly dissipated in the carefully controlled environment. Outside, a distant nebula painted swirls of deep purple and electric blue across the cosmic canvas, a stark contrast to the serious discussion happening inside. 3 holographic displays flickered to life, projecting intricate star maps and conflict data that had consumed months of intense research. The latest intelligence reports from deep space listening posts told a story of unending conflict. 2 advanced civilizations locked in a war that defied comprehension. The Zorn Collective and the Kritak Empire had been fighting for so long that the original reasons for their conflict had become little more than distant legends. Dr. Rodriguez turned to her team, a diverse group of military strategists, cynoanthropologists, and quantum communication experts. Each wore the subtle uniform of the Global Strategic Research Initiative, an organization that had risen to prominence in the decades following humanity's first confirmed contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. "We've been analyzing these transmission patterns for months," she began, her voice calm but charged with an undercurrent of excitement. A series of complex waveforms danced across the main display, showing communication signatures that most researchers would have dismissed as random noise. Dr. James Chen, a quantum communication specialist, stepped forward. His fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling apart layers of data with practiced precision. "It's not just noise," he said, zooming into a microscopic section of the transmission. "There's a pattern here that neither the Zorn nor the Kritak seem to have noticed." The room fell silent. Each team member understood the implications. Humanity had been watching, learning, analyzing, while the rest of the galaxy remained consumed by its endless conflict. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Queasy, a former military intelligence officer, pulled up additional tactical analyses. Entire star systems were marked with decades of conflict data, planets reduced to asteroid fields, entire species displaced, resources consumed in an endless cycle of destruction. The holographic representation showed millions of data points, each representing lives lost, resources expended, and potential futures destroyed. They've been fighting for so long that war has become their primary form of communication, Lieutenant Commander Queasy observed, her tone a mixture of professional detachment and genuine human empathy. The research station itself was a testament to humanity's approach. Unlike the massive, armored space stations of other species, this was a delicate instrument of observation and understanding. Solar panels that looked more like intricate works of art captured energy with unprecedented efficiency. Communication arrays designed to listen, rather than broadcast, spread out like delicate spider webs against the station's exterior. Dr. Rodriguez understood something fundamental that many other species missed. Conflict was a problem to be solved, not a state of being to be maintained. Her team represented humanity's most potent weapon, not a physical weapon of destruction, but an instrument of understanding and innovative problem-solving. A junior researcher named Marcus approached with a fresh set of data compilations. "We've identified consistent quantum communication vulnerabilities in both the Zorn and Kritak networks," he reported, his hands trembling slightly with the excitement of potential discovery. The team began to see something extraordinary. The endless war was not a result of irreconcilable differences, but a complex system of miscommunication, entrenched historical misunderstandings, and technological limitations that had become self-perpetuating. Outside the observation deck, the universe continued its silent dance. Distant stars pulsed with ancient light, carrying stories of civilizations long forgotten. But here, in this moment, a small team of human researchers was about to change everything. Dr. Rodriguez looked at her team, scientists, strategists, analysts from different backgrounds united by a singular purpose. They were not just observers. They were problem solvers, bridge builders, individuals who saw potential where others saw only conflict. "Prepare a comprehensive report," she instructed. It's time we showed the galaxy what human perspective truly means. The holographic displays continued to pulse with data, each flicker representing potential pathways to peace, pathways that no one in the galaxy had yet imagined possible. The diplomatic vessel of the Zorn Collective was a marvel of biological engineering. Its hull seemed to breathe, shifting colors and textures in response to external stimuli. As it approached Earth's orbital reception zone, navigation systems guided it with a precision that spoke of centuries of interstellar travel. Inside the vessel, Ambassador Krulax adjusted the neural interface that allowed direct communication with his ship's living systems. His species had long prided itself on technological superiority, a belief carefully cultivated over thousands of years of galactic presence. The mission was simple: assess humanity's potential as a strategic ally in the ongoing conflict with the Kritak Empire. What Krulax did not anticipate was the reception waiting for him. The Human Diplomatic Center was a study in calculated simplicity. Unlike the ornate meeting chambers of most galactic species, this facility embraced a design that was both functional and subtly impressive. Large windows overlooked a carefully curated landscape that seemed to blur the lines between architecture and nature. Every element spoke of intentional design. Nothing was accidental. Dr. Elena Rodriguez led the human delegation. She wore a tailored suit that was neither military nor strictly diplomatic, but something entirely unique. Her team represented a cross-section of human expertise, specialists in communication, strategic analysis, technological innovation, and cultural interpretation. As Krulax entered the meeting room, he noticed something immediately different. Most diplomatic encounters followed a rigid protocol. Species would present their historical context, state their objectives, and engage in carefully measured exchanges. But the humans seemed to approach the meeting with an entirely different mindset. "Welcome," Dr. Rodriguez began. "We understand you're here to discuss the ongoing conflict between the Zorn Collective and the Kritak Empire." It was a statement, not a question. The directness was jarring to the Zorn ambassador. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Queasy activated a holographic display that immediately caught Krulax's attention. Instead of the typical military positioning maps, this presentation was a complex web of interconnected data points. Economic flows, communication networks, resource distribution, population movements, all were represented in a three-dimensional model that seemed to pulse with life. "We've been studying your conflict," Dr. Rodriguez continued, "and we've identified something interesting." Dr. James Chen stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He manipulated the holographic display, zooming into microscopic communication pathways. "Your technological infrastructure has remained fundamentally unchanged for nearly 3 centuries, he observed. Despite multiple conflicts, your core communication and strategic systems have followed almost identical patterns. Krulax felt something he had not experienced in decades: genuine surprise. The human team began to deconstruct the conflict with a level of insight that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. They weren't just analyzing the war, they were revealing the complex sociological and technological mechanisms that sustained it. "You're not looking to win a war," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "You're trapped in a system of communication that prevents genuine resolution." The Zorn ambassador's neural interface began to transmit a complex emotional response, a mixture of defensiveness, intrigue, and a growing sense of respect. The humans were not offering an alliance in the traditional sense. They were offering a perspective. Marcus, the junior researcher from the previous research station, presented a series of potential communication restructuring models. Each was elegant in its simplicity, demonstrating how minor adjustments could fundamentally alter the conflict's dynamics. "We're not interested in taking sides," Lieutenant Commander Queasy clarified. "We're interested in solving the underlying problem." The meeting continued, but it was clear something extraordinary was happening. The Zorn delegation had arrived expecting a standard diplomatic exchange. Instead, they were experiencing a comprehensive deconstruction of their longest-standing conflict. As the session progressed, Krelax realized that humanity represented something entirely new in the galactic landscape. They were not just another species seeking advantage. They were problem solvers who saw conflicts as complex systems to be understood and resolved. The diplomatic center's windows reflected the changing light, symbolizing the shift happening in the room. What had begun as a routine assessment was transforming into something far more significant. The potential first step toward ending a war that had consumed generations. Humanity was entering the galactic stage, and they were playing by entirely different rules. The research facility hummed with a unique energy. Nestled in a remote mountain range, it appeared deceptively simple from the outside. A series of interconnected buildings that blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Inside, however, something extraordinary was taking shape. Dr. James Chen stood before a massive holographic display, his fingers dancing across quantum communication patterns that most researchers would have dismissed as meaningless noise. Surrounding him, a team of specialists from diverse backgrounds worked with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "Look at the communication infrastructure," he said, zooming into a microscopic section of intercepted transmissions. The display transformed into a complex web of interconnected data streams, each pulse and wave telling a story far more nuanced than simple military communications. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved closer, studying the intricate patterns. The Kritak and Zorn communication networks were sophisticated beyond most species' comprehension. Quantum entanglement allowed for instantaneous communication across vast distances, a technology that most civilizations would consider the pinnacle of technological achievement. But the humans saw something else entirely. "It's not about the technology itself," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Queasy observed. "It's about the assumptions built into the system." Marcus, the junior researcher, began pulling apart layers of communication protocols. Each reveal was like peeling back an intricate mechanical layer. The communication networks were not just transmission systems, they were reflections of entire cultural paradigms. The Kritak rely on a hierarchical communication model that prioritized chain of command above all else. Every transmission carried multiple layers of authentication, status verification, and institutional clearance. It was a system so rigid that it actually prevented genuine information exchange. The Zorn Collective, by contrast, used a more fluid communication approach. Their quantum networks allowed for complex emotional and sensory data transmission. But this very flexibility had become a weakness. Centuries of conflict had introduced so many layers of emotional and historical context that clear strategic communication had become nearly impossible. "They're not talking to each other," Dr. Chen said. "They're talking past each other." A breakthrough emerged from an unexpected direction. Dr. Rodriguez had brought in experts from fields typically considered irrelevant to military strategy. Linguists, cultural anthropologists, even game theory specialists. They approached the communication networks not as technological systems, but as living, evolving languages. "Every communication carries the weight of historical trauma," explained Dr. Aisha Kimethi, a cultural reconstruction specialist. Her analysis showed how each transmission was laden with generational memories of conflict, loss, and perceived injustice. The team worked in shifts, their dedication transforming the research facility into a hub of continuous innovation. Walls were covered with complex diagrams, communication flowcharts, and cultural analysis models. It was less a military research center and more a place of profound understanding. Lieutenant Commander Quasi brought in military strategic perspectives. Her background in conflict resolution provided a critical framework. "We're not just decoding communication," she explained. "We're identifying the systemic barriers that prevent genuine dialogue." Days turned into weeks. The research team developed increasingly sophisticated models. They weren't just analyzing the communication networks. They were creating a comprehensive understanding of how two advanced civilizations had maintained a state of perpetual conflict. Marcus discovered a critical insight. The quantum communication networks of both the Kritak and Zorn contained subtle recursive loops, communication patterns that essentially reinforce existing conflict narratives. It was as if the communication infrastructure itself was designed to prevent resolution. The technology is maintaining the conflict, Dr. Chen realized. The communication systems have become more than just a means of transmission. They're active participants in perpetuating misunderstanding. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the research facility, the team realized they were developing something far more significant than a strategic analysis. They were creating a blueprint for understanding how complex systems of communication can either prevent or facilitate genuine understanding. Dr. Rodriguez looked at her team, a diverse group united by curiosity, creativity, and a fundamental belief in human potential. They had transformed a seemingly impossible challenge into an opportunity for unprecedented insight. "We're going to change everything," she said quietly. The research facility continued its quiet work, a beacon of human innovation hidden from the galaxy's view. For now, the infiltration design room looked nothing like a traditional military planning center. Soft ambient lighting illuminated workstations where holographic displays danced with impossible complexity. Lines of code moved like living entities, transforming and adapting in real time. Dr. James Chen stood at the center of this technological symphony, his fingers moving with a precision that blurred the line between human and machine. Surrounding him, a team of the world's most brilliant cyber specialists worked in near-perfect synchronization. "We're not building a weapon," he explained to Lieutenant Commander Sarah Queasy. "We're creating a communication key that will fundamentally restructure how these civilizations interact." The infiltration algorithm was unlike anything in galactic technological history. Most species approached network infiltration as a form of warfare, seeking to disable, destroy, or manipulate. The human approach was radically different. They were designing a system that would reveal, connect, and ultimately heal. Marcus, the junior researcher who had shown remarkable insight in previous stages, developed a breakthrough approach. He realized that the quantum communication networks of the Zorn Collective and Kritak Empire contained inherent vulnerabilities, not in their technological infrastructure, but in their fundamental communication assumptions. "It's like they've been speaking different languages for so long that they've forgotten how to listen," Marcus explained, projecting a complex visualization of communication pathways. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between workstations, her strategic mind seeing connections that others might miss. Each team member brought a unique perspective. Linguistics experts worked alongside quantum physicists. Cultural anthropologists collaborated with network security specialists. The infiltration design went far beyond traditional cyber strategies. They were creating a communication translation matrix that would do more than simply breach security protocols. This algorithm would rebuild communication channels, strip away layers of historical misunderstanding, and create a foundation for genuine dialogue. Lieutenant Commander Queasy brought military strategic perspectives that kept the team grounded. "We're not just breaking through their systems," she cautioned. "We're creating a bridge between two civilizations that have forgotten how to connect." Days turned into weeks. The team worked in carefully managed shifts, their dedication transforming the research facility into a crucible of innovation. Walls displayed complex diagrams that looked more like abstract art than technological schematics. Each line represented potential communication pathways, each color a different layer of cultural understanding. Dr. Aisha Kamethi, the cultural reconstruction specialist, played a crucial role. She helped to design algorithm components that could translate not just linguistic meanings, but deeper cultural contexts. The infiltration design would carry more than just data. It would transmit nuanced understanding. The quantum communication key they were developing was elegant in its complexity. It would exploit the existing network infrastructure of both civilizations, using their own communication systems against the very barriers that prevented resolution. "We're not hacking their systems," Dr. Chen explained during one of their review sessions. "We're providing a universal translator that works at the quantum communication level." Marcus discovered a critical breakthrough. By identifying recursive communication loops in both the Zorn and Kritak networks, they could design an algorithm that would essentially reset communication pathways. It was like providing a global reset button for centuries of misunderstanding. The team worked with a sense of profound purpose. This was more than a technological challenge. It was an opportunity to demonstrate humanity's unique approach to complex problems. Where other civilizations saw impenetrable barriers, humans saw intricate puzzles waiting to be solved. Dr. Rodriguez understood the deeper implications. This infiltration design was not just about ending a specific conflict. It was a demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to interstellar relations, one based on understanding, connection, and genuine communication. As the final components of the algorithm came together, the research facility seemed to pulse with potential. The holographic displays showed increasingly complex simulations, each run revealing new layers of possibility. "We're ready," Dr. Chen announced, his voice calm but charged with an undercurrent of excitement. The infiltration design was complete, a communication key that could potentially change the course of galactic history sat quietly in their systems, waiting to be deployed. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The moment of intervention arrived with an almost supernatural silence. Across thousands of star systems, military command centers suddenly went still. Holographic displays flickered, communication channels dissolved into static, and centuries of carefully maintained conflict infrastructure simply stopped. In the primary Kritak Battle Command Station, Fleet Admiral Korzak watched in growing horror as his intricate network of quantum communication relays began to unravel. Weapon system interfaces transformed into cascading streams of incomprehensible data. Defense protocols that had been refined over generations became nothing more than meaningless strings of information. Simultaneously, on the Zorn Collective's central command platform, similar chaos erupted. Transmission arrays that had been the backbone of their military communication network began to pulse with an entirely new type of signal. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a breakdown. It was something far more profound. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the research facility, her team gathered around a central monitoring station. Each specialist tracked different aspects of the intervention, their collective breath held in anticipation. Transmission sequence initiated, Dr. James Chen announced, his voice calm despite the magnitude of what was happening. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Queasy studied the real-time global communication maps. What they had created was not a weapon of destruction, but a communication reset mechanism. The algorithm moved through both civilizations' networks like a living entity, stripping away layers of historical misunderstanding, revealing communication pathways that had been buried beneath generations of conflict. Marcus, the junior researcher, tracked the quantum communication key's progression. "It's working," he whispered, watching as complex communication networks transformed in real time. The algorithm didn't just break through security protocols, it rewrote them entirely. On hundreds of planetary command centers, military leaders watched in stunned silence as their communication infrastructures underwent a complete metamorphosis. Weapon systems that had been primed for decades of continued conflict suddenly found themselves unable to process their primary directives. Dr. Aisha Kimethi monitored the cultural translation components of their intervention. The communication reset was doing more than just stopping the conflict. It was creating a framework for genuine understanding. Historical narratives that had been used to justify generations of warfare were being carefully deconstructed, their underlying emotional contexts exposed and neutralized. "We're not just stopping a war," Dr. Rodriguez explained to her team. "We're creating the potential for genuine communication." The 5-hour intervention unfolded with a precision that defied traditional military logic. No ships were destroyed. No direct military action was taken. Instead, the entire communication infrastructure of two massive interstellar civilizations was fundamentally transformed. Fleet communications that had been dedicated to maintaining conflict suddenly found themselves unable to process their previous directives. Military deployment algorithms became confused, unable to distinguish between threat and communication. Weapon systems that had been perpetually powered for generations simply powered down, their core programming unable to justify continued aggression. Lieutenant Commander Queasy tracked the global impact. "We've essentially created a communication immune system," she observed. "The algorithm worked like a sophisticated firewall, preventing the re-establishment of previous conflict communication patterns. On planetary surfaces across multiple star systems, military personnel looked at each other in confusion. Entire fleets found themselves unable to maintain previous deployment strategies. Communication channels that had been filled with generations of hatred and misunderstanding were being carefully dismantled and rebuilt." Dr. Chen watched the progression with a sense of profound amazement. "We're not just stopping a war," he said quietly. "We're showing them a different way of existing." The research facility pulsed with a sense of collective achievement. What had begun as a theoretical exploration had transformed into the most significant intervention in galactic conflict resolution history. As the 5 hours drew to a close, something extraordinary happened. The communication networks of the Zorn Collective and Kritak Empire didn't just stop. They began to connect in ways they never had before. Historical narratives were being recontextualized. Generations of misunderstanding were being carefully unraveled. Dr. Rodriguez looked at her team, a diverse group of specialists who had done something unprecedented. They had not conquered. They had not destroyed. They had created the potential for understanding. "We're ready for the next phase," she announced. The galaxy would never be the same. The diplomatic center stood as a testament to human innovation, a structure that seemed to breathe with possibility. Delegates from the Zorn Collective and Kritak Empire arrived with a mixture of confusion, frustration, and an underlying sense of something profound having changed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez welcomed them with a calm that belied the magnitude of the moment. The negotiation chamber was designed differently from traditional diplomatic spaces. Instead of opposing sides separated by formal barriers, the room featured a circular configuration that encouraged genuine dialogue. Fleet Admiral Korzak of the Kritak Empire entered first, his biomechanical exoskeleton reflecting the soft ambient lighting. Beside him, Diplomatic Coordinator Zeravex from the Zorn Collective moved with a mixture of caution and barely contained curiosity. "We do not understand," Korzak began, his translation device converting his complex linguistic patterns into clear human speech. "Our entire communication infrastructure has been fundamentally altered." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Queasy stepped forward. She understood that this was more than a diplomatic negotiation. It was an opportunity to demonstrate a completely different approach to conflict resolution. "What you experienced was not an attack," she explained. "It was a communication reset." The translation devices worked overtime, attempting to capture the nuanced meaning behind her words. Dr. Aisha Kamethi, the cultural reconstruction specialist, had carefully prepared linguistic frameworks that would help bridge the vast cultural differences. Dr. James Chen presented a holographic display that showed the intricate communication networks they had analyzed. Each layer revealed the complex historical misunderstandings that had sustained the conflict for generations. It was less a presentation of data and more a deconstruction of generations of miscommunication. "Your conflict was not about resources," Dr. Rodriguez observed. "It was about a fundamental inability to truly communicate." The diplomatic chamber became a place of profound revelation. The holographic displays began to show layers of historical context, not as competing narratives, but as interconnected human experiences. Moments of potential connection that had been missed over centuries became painfully clear. Marcus, the junior researcher, had developed a unique visualization tool. It mapped out communication potentials, showing the countless moments where genuine understanding could have prevented escalation. The displays revealed a stunning truth. The conflict had been sustained more by communication barriers than by actual fundamental differences. Zeravex from the Zorn Collective leaned forward, her sensory tendrils processing the information in ways that transcended traditional verbal communication. "We have been speaking," she translated, "but never truly listening." The negotiation was unlike any in galactic history. Humans did not present themselves as mediators or judges. They were facilitators of understanding. providing tools and perspectives that allowed both civilizations to see their conflict from an entirely new perspective. Dr. Kimathi introduced communication reconstruction techniques that helped the delegates process generations of collective trauma. Instead of focusing on blame or victory, the discussion centered on understanding the systemic issues that had perpetuated the conflict. Lieutenant Commander Kwesi brought strategic insights that demonstrated how the continuous war had actually prevented both civilizations from addressing their core developmental challenges. Resource allocation, technological innovation, cultural growth, all had been sacrificed to the ongoing conflict. Hours passed, but time seemed to move differently in the diplomatic chamber. Holographic displays continued to reveal layers of misunderstanding, showing how communication patterns had become self-reinforcing cycles of conflict. "We are not here to judge," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "We are here to provide a pathway to resolution." The Kritak and Zorn delegates began to see each other differently. The communication reset had done more than just stop the war. It had created a framework for genuine understanding. Historical narratives that had been used to justify generations of warfare were being carefully deconstructed. As the diplomatic session continued, something extraordinary happened. The delegates began to collaborate, sharing perspectives that would have been unthinkable mere days earlier. They were no longer representatives of opposing forces, but partners in understanding. Dr. Chen tracked the communication dynamics, watching as decades of tension began to dissolve. The human team had not just stopped a war, they had created the potential for genuine interstellar cooperation. "We choose understanding," Korzak finally stated, his words carrying the weight of generations. The diplomatic center seemed to pulse with a sense of new possibility. Humanity had shown the galaxy that conflict was not an inevitability, but a problem waiting to be solved. The next chapter of galactic history was about to begin. The Galactic Research Symposium buzzed with an energy unlike any previous gathering. Delegates from hundreds of species filled a massive conference center, their attention focused on a single presentation platform where human researchers prepared to share their breakthrough. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this extraordinary moment. Behind her, holographic displays revealed the intricate communication analysis that had fundamentally transformed interstellar relations. The room represented the most diverse collection of scientific minds in galactic history, each species struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what humans had accomplished. Dr. James Chen began the technical presentation, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "What we discovered was not just a communication vulnerability," he explained. "It was a fundamental misunderstanding of how complex systems interact." The presentation went far beyond the recent conflict between the Zorn Collective and Kritak Empire. It revealed a comprehensive analysis of communication breakdown mechanisms that existed across multiple civilizations. Each slide peeled back layers of technological and cultural assumptions that had previously been considered immutable. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kwesi provided strategic context. Her section of the presentation demonstrated how communication barriers create systemic conflicts that extend far beyond military confrontations. Economic systems, cultural exchanges, technological collaborations, all suffered from similar structural limitations. Marcus, the junior researcher who had been instrumental in the breakthrough, presented a series of revolutionary communication modeling techniques. His work showed how seemingly isolated communication barriers could create cascading effects across entire galactic systems. Dr. Aisha Kimathi introduced the cultural reconstruction components of their research. Her analysis revealed how communication patterns were deeply intertwined with historical narratives, emotional contexts, and collective memory. The humans had developed a framework for understanding conflict that transcended traditional diplomatic approaches. The symposium attendees represented a cross-section of galactic civilization. Biological forms that would have seemed utterly alien to human observers sat side by side, their sensory apparatuses focused intently on the presentation. Some had translucent skin that revealed complex internal systems. Others existed as energy constructs or quantum-based intelligences. "We're not presenting a solution," Dr. Rodriguez emphasized. We're presenting a method of understanding. The research revealed something profound. Most galactic civilizations approached communication as a technical challenge, a matter of transmission and reception. Humans had demonstrated that communication was a complex adaptive system, more akin to a living organism than a mechanical process. Dr. Chen showed how their communication reset algorithm could be adapted to various interspecies conflict scenarios. It wasn't a universal tool, but a flexible framework for understanding systemic communication barriers. Each slide demonstrated the algorithm's potential for revealing hidden connection pathways. The most stunning revelation came from the economic analysis. The continuous conflict between the Zorn Collective and Kritak Empire had consumed resources that could have transformed entire star systems. By preventing this conflict, the potential for technological and cultural development had been dramatically increased. Lieutenant Commander Kwesi presented strategic projections that showed the long-term implications. The communication reset had not just stopped a war. It had created potential pathways for unprecedented cooperation. Resources previously dedicated to military infrastructure could now be redirected to scientific research, cultural exchange, and technological innovation. Marcus's visualization tools allowed the symposium attendees to see communication potential in ways they had never imagined. Holographic displays showed intricate networks of potential interaction, each connection representing a moment of possible understanding. Dr. Kamathi's cultural analysis was particularly compelling. She demonstrated how communication barriers were often maintained by deeply ingrained narrative structures, historical memories that became self-reinforcing conflict mechanisms. As the presentation concluded, something extraordinary happened. The symposium delegates began to engage in a level of dialogue that would have been impossible before. Species that had existed in isolated communication bubbles for millennia started to see potential connections. "We are not exceptional," Dr. Rodriguez said in her closing remarks. "We are simply willing to look at complex systems differently." The symposium hall seemed to vibrate with potential. Humanity had demonstrated something profound, that communication was not a technical challenge, but a creative opportunity for understanding. Outside the conference center, the galaxy seemed to pause. Something fundamental had changed. The human researchers looked at each other, a team that had done something unprecedented. They had not conquered. They had not destroyed. They had created the potential for genuine connection. A new chapter of galactic civilization was about to begin. 10 years had passed since the 5-hour intervention that changed galactic history. The research facility where it all began now stood as a living monument to human innovation, a complex that was part research center, part diplomatic hub, part cultural exchange platform. Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked through the facility's central atrium, watching delegates from hundreds of different species move through the space. What had once been a simple research center had transformed into the most significant interstellar communication research hub in known space. The Kritak and Zorn delegates, who had once been bitter enemies, now worked together on joint scientific initiatives. Their collaborative research stations orbited peaceful star systems that had previously been battlegrounds. Entire planetary ecosystems that had been devastated by centuries of conflict were now being carefully restored. Dr. James Chen approached, holographic displays dancing around his workspace. The communication reconstruction algorithms have been adapted to 17 different interstellar conflict zones, he reported. The most recent application had successfully prevented a potential conflict between two methane-breathing civilizations in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kwesi managed the strategic implementation teams. What had begun as a military research initiative had transformed into a comprehensive peace-building organization. They were no longer just preventing conflicts, they were creating frameworks for genuine understanding. Marcus, no longer the junior researcher but now a lead communication systems designer, demonstrated the latest iteration of their breakthrough technology. The communication reset algorithms had evolved into something far more sophisticated. Adaptive systems that could identify potential conflict pathways before they fully developed. Dr. Aisha Kamathi's Cultural Reconstruction Department had become a critical component of interstellar diplomacy. They had developed techniques that allowed different species to understand each other's communication contexts in ways that went far beyond traditional translation methods. The facility was more than a research center. It had become a living example of what genuine interspecies cooperation could look like. Architectural designs incorporated elements from multiple civilizations. Communication spaces were designed to accommodate physiological and sensory differences that would have been considered impossible a decade earlier. Delegates moved through spaces that blurred the lines between research, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Holographic displays showed ongoing collaborative projects, terraforming initiatives, shared scientific research, cultural exchange programs that allowed species to genuinely understand each other's perspectives. Dr. Rodriguez reflected on the journey. Their initial intervention had been more than just stopping a war. They had demonstrated a fundamentally different approach to understanding complex systems. The communication reset was not about control. It was about revealing potential. The economic impact had been staggering. Resources previously dedicated to military infrastructure were now being redirected to scientific research, environmental restoration, and cultural development. Entire star systems that had been locked in perpetual conflict were now centers of innovation and cooperation. Marcus showed the latest communication potential maps. The holographic displays revealed intricate networks of possible interaction, each connection representing a moment of potential understanding. Where previous galactic models showed isolated civilizations, these new maps demonstrated complex, interconnected potential. Lieutenant Commander Queasy's strategic analysis teams had become the most respected conflict prevention organization in known space. They no longer responded to conflicts. They anticipated and prevented them by creating communication frameworks that revealed underlying connection potentials. Dr. Chen's research teams continued to develop more sophisticated communication reconstruction algorithms. Each iteration became more nuanced, more capable of understanding the complex ways different species communicate and misunderstand each other. The facility had become a beacon of hope. Species that had existed in isolation for millennia were now finding ways to collaborate, to understand, to connect. The human approach had demonstrated that conflict was not an inevitability. It was a problem waiting to be solved. Dr. Rodriguez gathered her original team for their annual review. They looked different now. Older, certainly, but with a sense of profound accomplishment. They had not just changed a war. They had changed the fundamental way civilizations understood each other. "We're not done," she told them. "We're just getting started." Outside, the stars seemed to pulse with new potential. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had shown that true strength lies not in conquest, but in understanding. A new chapter of galactic civilization continued to unfold, one communication pathway at a time.